Cops throw dogs at Latino, but everything changes when he flashes his FBI badge. The afternoon sun hung low over the Dallas suburbs, casting long golden beams across the neighborhood. The streets were alive with the usual rhythm of daily life. Children laughing as they rode their bikes, an old man watering his front lawn, a couple walking their small dog. To anyone passing through, it was the very picture of calm, suburban America. But peace never lasts long when abuse of power drives the scene. The calm was shattered by the sudden jarring screech of tires. Two black and white police cruisers swerved around the corner, their sirens silent but their lights flashing an ominous red and blue pattern across the houses. They accelerated aggressively, cutting across the street and skidding to a stop in a way that wasn't about safety, but intimidation. Car doors slammed open with a violence that rattled the air. 4 uniformed officers spilled out of the vehicles, moving quickly and deliberately. They spread out like a hunting pack, their hands resting firmly on their holsters, eyes sharp with hostility. At the center of their sudden formation was a man in his late 30s. He stood alone at the curb, holding a paper bag from the small grocery store on the corner. His name was Gabriel Torres, and though to most he looked like just another Latino neighbor, his bearing gave him away. He stood tall, his back straight, his eyes calm yet alert. He radiated a quiet confidence, the kind of presence that suggested he'd been in situations far more dangerous than this one. The lead officer raised his hand sharply. "You, hands where I can see them." His voice cracked like a whip through the neighborhood. Gabriel froze in place, setting the bag carefully on the ground. He raised his palms slowly, deliberately, not with fear but with measured restraint. His face betrayed no panic, no nervousness, only the steady composure of someone who had dealt with worse. "What's the problem, officer?" Gabriel asked. His tone was calm, his words measured. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for," the officer barked back, his lip curling into something close to a smirk. Another officer moved around to Gabriel's side, circling him like a predator sizing up prey. "Yeah, we've had reports of some troublemakers around here. Looks like we just found one." From the back of the cruisers, muffled growls and sharp barks erupted. The dogs inside had caught the tension in the air. Their claws scraped against the metal interior, their teeth flashing through the gaps in the windows. Gabriel's gaze flicked toward the sound, his jaw tightening. He had worked with canine units before. He knew the potential of trained dogs, and the damage they could do in the wrong hands. "Get on the ground before we let them loose," the second officer barked, tugging at the leash attached to one of the canines. The German shepherd strained forward, foam building at the corners of its mouth, teeth gnashing. The air in the neighborhood thickened with tension. Curtains rustled as neighbors peeked out from behind blinds. A mother clutched her young son's hand, pulling him back inside the safety of their home. Down the street, a teenager already had his phone out, recording. "What are they doing to him?" someone whispered. "He didn't even do anything." Gabriel's voice broke through the chaos like tempered steel. "You're making a mistake," the lead officer scoffed. "Oh, we'll see about that." He motioned with 2 fingers, and one of the handlers opened the cruiser door fully. The German shepherd lunged out, hitting the pavement hard, barking furiously as it strained against the leash. The second dog followed suit, both of them pulling violently toward Gabriel. The sound was feral, primal, meant to terrify. Gasps erupted from the crowd of neighbors now gathering at the edge of the street. One woman lifted her phone higher, voice trembling as she narrated into her camera. "Oh my God, they're setting dogs on that man. They're really doing it." The officers tightened their grips, knuckles white, waiting for the moment to release the dogs. Gabriel remained perfectly still. He had not moved since placing his grocery bag down. His palms were still visible, his eyes steady, his breathing calm. To the officers, his composure looked like arrogance. To the neighbors, it looked like quiet strength. "Last chance," the lead officer snarled. "On the ground!" The dogs barked louder, their voices echoing across the houses. The crowd flinched with every lunge, expecting at any moment to see Gabriel torn to the ground, but Gabriel did not flinch. Instead, he straightened his shoulders slightly, his eyes narrowing, his entire presence shifting from passive compliance to something far sharper, commanding. He had not yet revealed who he was, but in that moment, anyone paying attention could sense it. This was no ordinary man. "Put the dogs away," Gabriel said quietly but firmly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried with it the authority of someone used to giving orders that were followed. The officers laughed. Or what? The crowd's murmurs grew louder, phones recording, lenses focusing. A young man whispered to his friend, "He doesn't even look scared, who is he?" The lead officer snarled and snapped his fingers. The leashes unclipped. The dogs lunged. The crowd screamed. Gabriel didn't move. The German shepherds bounded forward, their jaws snapping. But as they reached him, something remarkable happened. Instead of panicking, Gabriel stepped forward with such calm precision that even the dogs hesitated. He raised one hand, not fast, not threatening, but steady. "Enough," Gabriel said, his voice low and commanding. The dogs barked furiously, circling but not striking. Their handlers scrambled, confused, tugging desperately at the leashes to regain control. The scene had shifted. The crowd sensed it. The officers were no longer entirely in charge. "Who the hell do you think you are?" one officer yelled, his hand reaching for his taser. Gabriel's eyes flicked to him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached inside his jacket pocket. The officers shouted immediately, "Hands where we can see them!" "Don't move." But Gabriel didn't falter. He withdrew a black leather badge holder and flicked it open with a practiced motion. The sunlight caught the gold emblem, reflecting it for everyone to see. FBI Special Agent. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. The energy on the street flipped instantly. "You've just assaulted a federal agent," Gabriel said, his tone now cutting through the chaos like a blade. "And every second you keep this up digs your hole deeper." The officers froze. The crowd erupted in whispers and shouts. And for the first time since the cruisers arrived, the hunters realized they were the prey. The air grew heavy, so thick with tension that even the neighbors holding up their phones stopped speaking. The only sounds were the ragged barking of the dogs, the faint buzz of the cicadas in the distance, and the low hum of adrenaline pumping through every bystander's veins. The four officers stood frozen in place, staring at the golden FBI emblem gleaming in Gabriel Torres's hand. The badge seemed to shine brighter than the setting sun, and its weight carried more than metal. It carried authority, accountability, and the very real threat of consequences. The lead officer's jaw tightened. His hand twitched near his weapon, but he hesitated. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. They had come here looking for a target they thought they could intimidate, maybe even humiliate. Instead, they had walked into the crosshairs of federal power. "You've got to be kidding me," the second officer muttered under his breath, his voice shaky. Gabriel's eyes swept across them one by one. His composure never wavered. "You sick dogs on a federal agent without cause. That is assault. That is obstruction. And right now, you're seconds away from turning this into something that will ruin every last one of your careers." The crowd stirred, voices rising in a wave of disbelief and anger. A man holding his phone shouted, "You're done. He's FBI. Y'all are finished." The officers stiffened, realizing every second of this was being streamed live to hundreds, maybe thousands of viewers. The lead officer tried to regain control, raising his voice as if volume could mask his fear. "Badge or not, you're under investigation. You fit the description." Gabriel cut him off with a voice that cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare hide behind a bogus description. You profiled me. You escalated without cause. And you unleashed deadly force. Those dogs could have killed me." The German shepherds, still restless, barked furiously. The handlers yanked their leashes, but the dogs' focus had shifted. They weren't lunging at Gabriel anymore. They were agitated by their own confusion, caught between training and the unshakable confidence radiating from him. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The balance of power had shifted, but pride is a stubborn thing. Instead of backing down, the lead officer snapped, "Hands on your head. On your knees, now." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the neighbors who had initially kept quiet now shouted in protest. "Are you serious? He just showed you his badge." "You can't do that to a federal agent." Gabriel didn't move. He stood tall, the badge still visible in his hand, the grocery bag forgotten at his feet. "You think you're in charge," he said softly, almost like a warning. "But you've already lost control." One of the younger officers, sweat dripping down his temple, whispered to his partner, "We need to walk away. Right now. This is going to blow up." But the lead officer shook his head stubbornly. Pride, anger, maybe fear of losing face, it kept him rooted in defiance. You think you're untouchable because of that badge? He spat. We've dealt with feds before. Doesn't scare me. Gabriel's lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes narrowed, steel hardening in his gaze. You're not scared? Then let me paint the picture for you. He took a single step forward, his voice dropping low but carrying across the entire street. In less than 10 minutes, this block is going to be swarming with federal vehicles. They're going to arrest you, in front of these neighbors, in front of these cameras, for assaulting a federal officer. Those dogs, evidence. Your weapons, evidence. And every phone recording here? Exhibit A. Your careers are already over. The only question left is whether you go home tonight or you go in cuffs. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. The weight of his words sank into the officers like lead. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, lowering his weapon slightly. The younger one followed suit. Only the lead officer remained stubborn, his ego battling his survival instincts. You don't get to threaten me, he growled. Gabriel tilted his head, a faint trace of something almost like pity flashing in his eyes. That's not a threat. That's a promise. He raised his phone, pressing speed dial. The crowd went silent, holding its breath as Gabriel spoke clearly, his voice carrying like a final judgment. This is Special Agent Gabriel Torres, badge number 2743. I have 4 local officers obstructing a federal investigation, assaulting me with K-9 units, and continuing to resist federal authority. I need immediate backup. The silence that followed was deafening. The officers' faces drained of color. They had expected submission. They had expected fear. Instead, their own fear was now written across their features for the entire neighborhood to see. From somewhere in the crowd, a teenager shouted, "Oh man, y'all are screwed. FBI's coming." Gabriel ended the call and slid the phone back into his jacket pocket. He didn't need to say more. The die had been cast. The lead officer, trembling now with rage more than control, took a step forward. You think your buddies are going to scare us? Gabriel met his eyes, unblinking. Not scare. Arrest. The 2 younger officers exchanged a glance, the realization finally sinking in. They holstered their weapons, slowly raising their hands as if to signal surrender. The second officer muttered, "We're done, man. This isn't worth it." But the lead officer couldn't let go. His pride screamed louder than reason. He grabbed at Gabriel's arm, trying to force him down. The crowd screamed. But in one fluid motion, Gabriel twisted his arm free, spun, and pinned the officer's wrist behind his back with effortless precision. The officer cried out in pain, his weapon clattering to the ground. Gasps filled the air, but Gabriel's voice stayed calm. You just assaulted a federal agent again. Keep digging your own grave. The other 2 officers backed away, hands raised, their eyes wide with fear. The younger one whispered, "We're done." "We're done." Gabriel released the officer, who stumbled forward, clutching his wrist, his pride shattered in front of everyone. "Pick up your gun," Gabriel said coldly, "and it'll be the last mistake you make as a cop." The officer froze, his breathing ragged, sweat dripping down his temple. The sound of sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but this time they weren't local sirens. They had a different pitch, a different rhythm. The crowd began to cheer. Backup was on its way. And the officers knew their time was up. The sound came first, a low rising wail that echoed across the neighborhood. Not the sharp, familiar shriek of local police sirens, but a deeper, more deliberate tone. It was the kind of sound that made people step back, straighten their posture, and realize something far more serious was unfolding. The crowd erupted into whispers. "That's not regular cops. Wait, those are feds, aren't they? Oh man, it's really happening." Down the block, 3 black SUVs appeared, sleek and unmarked but unmistakably official. Their tinted windows glinted in the fading sunlight as they rolled in with precision, engines rumbling low like restrained thunder. The neighbors who had been recording from the start zoomed in, catching every angle. The spectacle had grown beyond a confrontation. It had become an event. The officers, who only minutes ago had moved with swagger and hostility, now stood pale and frozen. The younger one swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly in his throat. The second officer muttered, "Oh God, we're done. We're done." The lead officer, still nursing his wrist from Gabriel's takedown, tried to bark an order to his men, but the sound died in his throat. His voice was gone, swallowed by the realization of what those SUVs meant. The vehicles screeched to a halt. Doors flung open with synchronized efficiency, and men and women in tactical gear poured out. Their black vests bore bold white letters, FBI. They moved in formation, weapons ready but disciplined, eyes sweeping the scene with the cool precision of professionals. Federal agents. Everyone stand down, one of them shouted, his voice booming across the block. The crowd cheered. A woman raised her phone higher, tears in her eyes as she whispered, "Finally, justice." Gabriel didn't flinch. He stood tall at the center of it all, badge still visible in his hand, his face unreadable. When the lead FBI agent strode forward, Gabriel gave a sharp nod. "Agent Torres," the man said respectfully. "We got your call. Situation under control?" Gabriel's gaze flicked toward the four officers. His voice was ice. "Not yet. These men obstructed a federal agent, escalated with deadly force, and attempted unlawful detainment. They sicked K-9 units on me. They need to be disarmed and detained immediately." The lead FBI agent didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and his team moved like clockwork. "Local officers, drop your weapons and place your hands on your heads. Now!" The neighborhood erupted in applause. The sound of cheers, whistles, and shouts of approval filled the air as the balance of power swung completely. The younger officer complied instantly, his hands shooting into the air. The second officer followed, muttering curses under his breath but not daring to resist. The handlers holding the K-9s reluctantly unclipped their belts and dropped their sidearms to the pavement, their shoulders sagging with the weight of inevitability. But the lead officer, the same man who had barked orders, unleashed dogs and tried to force Gabriel down, hesitated. His jaw clenched tight, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "Do it," Gabriel commanded, his tone sharper now. "Hands on your head." The lead officer's breathing grew ragged. His pride fought against the chains of reality. He had spent years throwing his weight around this neighborhood, intimidating anyone who looked different, anyone who dared question his authority. And now here he stood, cornered, powerless, humiliated. The FBI agents closed in, their movements calm but unyielding. The officer snapped. "This is bull," he shouted, reaching toward his belt. Before the crowd could gasp, Gabriel moved. In a blur, he stepped forward, twisting the officer's arm up behind his back again, forcing him down to his knees. The officer cried out in pain, the sound sharp and pitiful. The lead FBI agent barked an order and two federal officers rushed in, clamping cuffs on the struggling man. His weapon was stripped from his holster, and within seconds he was pinned against his own cruiser, face pressed against the cold metal. The crowd roared in approval. Phones captured every second. The cop who had once terrorized them now reduced to a criminal in cuffs. Gabriel straightened, his face a mask of discipline. "You were given every chance to stop. You chose this," he said quietly, more to the officer than anyone else. The officer glared up at him, but his defiance was hollow now, his pride shattered. The other three officers were cuffed one by one, their heads hanging low, shame painted across their faces. The FBI agents moved with professional efficiency, reading them their rights as cameras rolled. The very laws they had twisted for their own abuse were now binding them. A teenager holding his phone high shouted, "World's gonna see this." "Y'all messed with the wrong guy." Gabriel turned, scanning the crowd. His gaze softened just slightly. "Keep recording," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Accountability matters. Never stop shining a light on the truth." The neighbors erupted again, chanting his name, clapping, cheering. For once, the community didn't feel powerless. They had witnessed justice, raw and undeniable. As the FBI agents led the officers toward the SUVs, one of the handlers tried to speak. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, we thought." Gabriel silenced him with a look. "You didn't think. That's the problem." The K-9s, calmer now under the hands of federal handlers, were guided gently into separate transport vehicles. Their snarls and aggression were gone, replaced by confusion, as though even they understood the shift in power. The lead FBI agent walked back to Gabriel, his expression respectful. "We'll take it from here, Agent Torres. Do you want to ride back with us?" Gabriel shook his head. "Not yet. I want the community to see this through." "They need closure," the agent nodded. "Understood. We'll process them downtown." As the SUVs pulled away, sirens flashing but silent, the four disgraced officers sat cuffed in the back seats, their futures collapsing with every turn of the wheel. The crowd remained buzzing with energy. Some hugged each other, some cried, and some simply stood in stunned silence. But all of them knew they had witnessed something rare, true accountability. Gabriel finally bent down, picked up his forgotten grocery bag, and held it loosely at his side. He looked less like a federal agent now and more like what he truly was. A man who belonged to the community he served. Someone who hadn't just defended himself, but defended them all. And though his badge had been the key to justice, it was his unshakable courage that left the deepest mark on everyone watching. The neighborhood would never forget this day, and the officers who once thought themselves untouchable had learned the harshest truth. No one is above the law. The roar of the SUVs faded as they carried the disgraced officers away. Swallowed by the distant hum of the city, the neighborhood, however, was far from quiet. People remained clustered along the sidewalks, buzzing with adrenaline and disbelief. Some neighbors were crying, some laughing nervously, others holding their phones high like trophies, determined to preserve every angle of what had just unfolded. For years, they had lived under the shadow of those officers, bullies in uniform who wielded power like a weapon instead of a shield. Tonight that shadow had been broken, and at the center of it all stood Gabriel Torres, the man they had thought was just another quiet neighbor. The FBI agents remained behind, forming a perimeter to calm the crowd and gather statements. Their presence brought an air of control and professionalism that stood in stark contrast to the chaos of minutes earlier. Tactical gear glinted under the dimming sun, radios crackled with clipped commands, and the neighborhood began to feel like a scene lifted straight out of a high-stakes drama. The lead FBI agent, Agent Reynolds, walked back toward Gabriel, clipboard in hand, his expression serious but respectful. "Torres, we've got them secured. My team will be collecting witness statements. We're also pulling the street cameras. This entire thing is going to hold up airtight in court." Gabriel gave a curt nod. "Good. These people deserve to know the system can work for them, not against them." Agent Reynolds tilted his head slightly, studying him. "You handled yourself well back there. Could have gone south real fast." Gabriel's expression remained steady. "They gave me no choice. But I wasn't going to let fear dictate the outcome." As the two spoke, an older woman from the crowd stepped forward, clutching her phone to her chest. Her eyes glistened with tears. "Agent Torres, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been who you are. They've harassed my grandson before, always saying he fit the description, always making him feel less than human." Gabriel softened, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why it was important that this played out the way it did. They needed to be stopped, and they needed to be seen being stopped. Accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about restoring trust." The crowd murmured in agreement. A teenage boy who had streamed the entire encounter stepped forward, his phone still recording. "Agent Torres, man, the whole internet's already blowing up. People are sharing it everywhere. You're a hero." Gabriel shook his head, his voice even but firm. "No, don't make me the story. Make this the story. The abuse, the profiling, the accountability. Don't let them bury it." The boy nodded slowly, lowering his phone. For the first time, he looked at Gabriel not as a viral sensation, but as a man who had just risked everything for the truth. Meanwhile, the K-9 units had been transported into federal vehicles. The dogs, calmer now, were being evaluated by handlers who treated them with professionalism instead of aggression. It was a small but powerful reminder that even the animals had been tools of abuse in the wrong hands, and now, like the community itself, they were free of that control. Agent Reynolds approached again, flipping through his clipboard. "Torres, protocol says we take you in for debriefing. But I'll admit, if you want to address the crowd first, I think it would go a long way." Gabriel straightened, scanning the faces around him. Dozens of neighbors, from children to elders, looked to him not just for reassurance but for validation. They needed to hear something more than silence. He stepped forward, his voice carrying with the practiced clarity of someone used to commanding attention in rooms full of power. "Today wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was just buying groceries just like any of you might. But the second those cruisers pulled up, those officers decided I was guilty of something. Not because of what I did, but because of how I look. That's not policing. That's profiling. And it's unacceptable." The crowd shouted in agreement, clapping and raising their voices. Gabriel continued, his tone sharper now. "They tried to use fear against me, dogs, weapons, intimidation. They thought power came from making someone feel small. But power doesn't come from abuse. Real power comes from responsibility, from serving others with integrity. A hush fell over the crowd as he paused, letting his words sink in. He held up his badge, the golden emblem catching the fading light. This badge doesn't make me better than anyone. It doesn't make me untouchable. It makes me accountable. It means every action I take reflects not just on me, but on the trust people place in this country's institutions. And if I can be held accountable, then so can anyone else who wears a uniform, local, state, or federal. No one is above the law. Applause broke out, louder this time, rolling through the block like a wave. Some people whistled, others raised their fists, and for a moment the community felt unified in a way it hadn't in years. The same teenage boy from before shouted, "They're never coming back here again." "Not after this." Gabriel gave a faint smile. "They won't, but don't let this moment fade. Keep recording. Keep speaking. Keep demanding better." Behind him, the FBI agents continued working, collecting witness statements, bagging weapons, documenting everything. The professionalism stood as a silent backdrop to Gabriel's words, proof that the system, when done right, could function as it was intended. The lead FBI agent finally stepped in. "All right, folks, we're going to need the street clear while we finish processing the scene. Anyone with footage, please forward it to the Bureau. This case is going to be airtight thanks to all of you." Neighbors began to disperse reluctantly, some still buzzing, some lingering in clusters to discuss what they had seen. The younger children, wide-eyed, clung to their parents. Older teens already began planning how to upload the videos to platforms, their voices crackling with excitement. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Gabriel took a step back from the center of it all. He retrieved his grocery bag from the ground, the simple brown sack now carrying a strange symbolism. Life had been interrupted, but life would go on. Agent Reynolds came up beside him. "Torres, you sure you don't want to ride back with us? It's been one hell of a day." Gabriel shook his head. "No, I'll walk. I need to feel the ground here in this neighborhood. I need them to see I'm still one of them." Reynolds studied him for a moment, then nodded with respect. "You're a rare one, Torres. Most would have folded under pressure. Instead, you set a standard." Gabriel gave the faintest of smiles, his eyes scanning the now calmer street. "It wasn't about me. It was about them. Always will be." As Reynolds walked off, Gabriel adjusted his jacket and began his quiet walk home. The crowd might disperse, the headlines might shift, but the ripple of this night would last far longer than the shouts and cheers. For this neighborhood, for these people, the truth had been undeniable. Justice could win, if someone had the courage to demand it, and Gabriel Torres had demanded it with nothing more than calm, conviction, and the power of the law behind him. The sun had nearly vanished behind the horizon, leaving the street bathed in a soft twilight glow. The neighborhood was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet. No longer the oppressive silence of fear, but the reflective calm of people who had witnessed a reckoning. Gabriel Torres stood at the center of the street, the brown grocery bag still in his hand. He could feel the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving behind a warm, steady hum of satisfaction. The 4 officers had been led away in federal SUVs, their handcuffs glinting in the low light as the last traces of their arrogance disappeared down the block. Neighbors lingered, hesitant to leave. Children peeked from doorways, parents whispered in disbelief, and even the teenagers who had been recording on their phones had put them down, finally able to watch the scene with their own eyes instead of screens. Gabriel knew their presence mattered. Every witness reinforced accountability. Agent Reynolds approached, checking his clipboard one last time. All statements collected. All weapons logged. The dogs are back at headquarters for evaluation. Scene secured. Gabriel nodded. Good. Make sure they get processed properly. And don't cut corners. They tried to hide behind a badge. They need to feel the full weight of the law. Reynolds nodded solemnly. They will. This is going to court. They'll face suspension, charges of assault, unlawful detention, and obstruction of justice. The evidence you helped preserve, your badge, witness statements, video recordings, makes this airtight. Gabriel allowed himself a faint smile. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring they can't do this to anyone else. That's all that matters. The crowd, emboldened by his words, began to murmur. One woman called out, Agent Torres, thank you. You've given us hope again. Gabriel glanced at her, eyes steady. Not me. The law gives you hope. And when it works as intended, it can protect anyone, regardless of race, age, or background. Today proved that. A teenage boy raised his phone once more, asking, "Agent Torres, are we going to see them pay for what they did?" Gabriel's gaze hardened slightly, though his voice stayed calm. "Yes, they will answer for their actions. And the rest of you? Don't forget this lesson. Always record, always speak out, and always demand accountability. Power isn't something you fear, it's something you monitor." From the side, the lead FBI agent added, "They won't be able to deny it. With this much evidence and witnesses, there's no getting out of it. They've humiliated themselves and betrayed the public's trust. The court will see that clearly." Gabriel turned back to the street, scanning the faces around him. "I didn't come here looking for conflict. I came here like any of you, buying groceries, living my life. But when abuse shows up at your door, you have to respond. You have to show that laws exist for everyone, even those in uniform." The crowd nodded in agreement. Some were wiping tears, others clenched fists in silent resolve, and a few whispered to themselves, repeating Gabriel's words. Justice had been served in the most public way possible, but its impact would linger far beyond the block. The FBI agents began organizing the next steps. Evidence bags were loaded into the SUVs, dogs evaluated and transported safely, and the officers' weapons cataloged for official records. Gabriel stepped aside, giving them space to work, though he remained close enough to ensure the integrity of the operation. One of the younger neighbors approached him cautiously. "Agent Torres, do you ever get scared? I mean, standing up to people like that?" Gabriel studied him for a moment, the streetlights casting long shadows across his face. "Fear is natural, but fear doesn't define you. How you act in spite of it, that defines you. That's why they underestimated me. They let arrogance guide them. Don't ever make that mistake." The boy nodded, eyes wide, absorbing the lesson. Gabriel smiled faintly. "Good, remember that. And remember, being courageous isn't about confrontation. It's about doing what's right, even when it's inconvenient, dangerous, or uncomfortable." The last of the local bystanders began to disperse, some leaving quickly, others lingering for a few final words of thanks. Gabriel watched them, feeling a quiet satisfaction. For months, this neighborhood had lived under the shadow of those corrupt officers. Tonight, that shadow had been lifted, replaced with a renewed sense of safety and trust. Agent Reynolds returned to Gabriel, adjusting his tactical vest. "Ready to head back?" he asked. Gabriel shook his head. "Not yet. I'll walk home. Let the people see that this neighborhood has its peace restored. Let them see that standing up for what's right doesn't make you a stranger. It makes you part of the solution." Reynolds studied him for a moment, admiration clear in his eyes. "Most people wouldn't have the patience or discipline to do what you just did." Gabriel simply nodded. "Patience isn't about waiting. It's about understanding the consequences of every action. Discipline is about keeping control when chaos erupts. That's what matters in the end." As he walked down the now quiet street, neighbors stepped aside respectfully, some nodding in acknowledgement. He passed the corner store where the incident had begun, glanced at the small brown bag still in his hand, and allowed himself the briefest smirk. Grocery run or battlefield, the principle was the same. Act with integrity, stand firm, and demand accountability. Behind him, the glow from the SUV lights faded, and the neighborhood finally exhaled. The lesson had been seared into memory. Abuse of power would not go unchallenged. And in that quiet victory, Gabriel Torres remained more than an agent. He was a guardian, a symbol, and a living reminder that courage and justice could still prevail. Before disappearing into the familiar streets of his community, he turned slightly, voice carrying one final message. Power is meaningless if it's abused. Remember that. And never let anyone make you feel small for who you are. With that, Gabriel Torres walked on, blending back into the life of a quiet neighbor. But the neighborhood and anyone who had witnessed the ordeal knew the truth. One man's courage, integrity, and authority could topple corruption and restore justice in a single, unforgettable afternoon. And as the stars emerged over the quiet suburb, the memory of this night remained vivid, a permanent testament to what happens when the law is respected, courage is exercised, and accountability is demanded.